Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dr. Doctor, the show where no topic is too hot or too cold. Whether it's politics, religion, relationships, entertainment, or everyday life, you will be hearing from the experts. This show is not for the faint of heart or the faint of mind. But if you want to be inspired, you have come to the right place. And now, prepare to be enlightened as we introduce the host of Dr. Doctor, Dr. Peter Tassi, and his close advisor, Dr. Fooch.
Hello and welcome to Dr. Doctor. Well, today we're fortunate to have with us a police officer, Anthony, and he's going to fill us in on the life of a police officer. You know, Anthony, many people view police officers as, they have generally a negative view. You know, they view police officers as overpaid, underworked, always at the coffee shop. And now I want to let our viewers know that this is where we broadcast from Canada. We're talking to a Canadian police officer in the province of Ontario here. And I would say that generally speaking, a lot of people have a negative view of police officers. As I said, overpaid, underworked, sitting around coffee shops. They're nothing but an aggravation. They're giving us out tickets. That's all they're good for, is giving tickets, some people say. And but yet when you look at the life of a police officer, from what little research I've done, you see that it can't be that easy of a life, because you look at the suicide rate, you look at the marriage breakups, you look at the strain on the officers' kids, you look at the strain on the family. And generally speaking, I think people would admit to that it looks like an easy life, but maybe it isn't as easy as it looks. So we'll have you on today to share with us, you know, some of your experiences and to address these questions. The life of a police officer. Is it an emotional and physical and psychological strain?
Well, it is, but a lot of what you said, I won't say I dispute it. I would just say there's a different side to that story. The one thing I'll acknowledge is police officers do have a reputation for being at the coffee shop. That is true. And nobody wants to get a ticket, right? Who would want a ticket? And personally, when I was a police officer, I detested giving out a ticket to an honest person, somebody who was working for a living and raising a family, and they'd made a mistake. I tried to be careful that I was giving at least out a ticket for a valid, flagrant violation when I saw one. But my objective when I gave a ticket to the person was to see if I could be so professional and so good about it that I could get them to thank me for the ticket. And every once in a while I succeeded at that, and the person would always, the words would come out, thank you, and they go, wait a minute, I didn't really mean that. And I'll say to them, that's okay, I understand what you're saying, right? But I tended to try to be very professional when I did that, because that was sometimes the only contact an honest, hardworking person had with the police. And their experiences of watching television or shows or movies is not going to give them an accurate representation of the day of a police officer. So, and I think that's why we're here today, is to discuss that. Now, I have to say, there is no perfect job, and I don't know any job where you're well paid, where you don't have stress, or where you don't, or there's responsibility, where you don't have aggravation and rules and restrictions and all kinds of different obstacles or guardrails put in your way to accomplishing that job. So in no way do I seek sympathy here for those.
No.
But let's face it, I think that the job is stressful, and that on an average day, a police officer will experience quite a variety of calls that they go on. The typical patrol car officer will go from a neighbor dispute, to they may go to a traffic accident where people are hurt, and they may go to a domestic dispute or a place where somebody's been victimized. Their house has been broken into, and they're looking for a report to be done. And so really, if you stop to think about all these calls, in each of those calls, the officer's experiencing some vicarious trauma. So inevitably, some hardness, you have to develop some sort of a thick skin. And to try to cope with this stuff. And I might add that it's important that you every once in a while take an emotional inventory of what you've experienced and think about the effect it's having on you. So there are certain things that are inevitably going to occur to an officer, because you do see the front line.
Before we get into that, so you're saying that going to these calls, generally speaking, they're all negative, even giving out a ticket. These are kind of negative experiences that cops have to feel all day, going to a call, going to see someone victimized, a robbery, even giving out a ticket. It's all kind of negative.
And you notice that, yes. And
would you say any of it's positive?
And yes, you're searching for that. In fact, universally, almost all people that I've spoken to inside the police profession said they wanted to become a police officer to help others, to help society. And they hope that they have a job that makes a difference and makes a contribution and is meaningful.
Right.
And that's what I was looking for. Now, there's a wide variety of different roles that you can do. There's detective jobs, and fingerprint, and all kinds of specialty areas. There's quite a few sort of mini careers that you can have in a given in policing, and you can move to secondary areas and do these other jobs if you wish, and some of which we're suited for, and maybe some that we're not. But yes, I would say that there's a fair bit of an officer's day is spent doing calls that have a negative spin to it. Right. But you're really there to help people. They're having a negative experience, and you're trying to guide them through it and help them. Okay, and there's as many crimes as there are. There's a victim for each of those crimes.
Right.
That is usually the person calling you.
Right. Now, given all that negativity, or a significant amount of negativity in a day from these experiences, even though you're there to help them and you're hoping that your work brings about good results, what impact does that have on personality of a police officer? You're going to get at that before I interrupted you before.
Well, yes. And I suppose it depends on the individuals, but generally speaking, let's be honest. You wouldn't be a very good police officer if you believed everything that everyone told you, because you're frequently dealing with people maybe on the fringes of criminality, and sometimes not. So, for example, even if you're dealing with honest people and you go to a car accident, you have to be aware that there may be other things going on. It might not just be a simple car accident. Maybe it's a car accident because one of the cars is stolen, or one of the drivers is a suspended driver, and that person is going to lie to you and give you a false identity because they're not allowed to drive, because they're a lousy driver. And you can think about, of course, someone can be impaired with alcohol or drugs, and they're going to try to conceal that from you as best they can. So you have to be very aware. And so to answer, one of the answers to your question is that an officer learns to be suspicious and to be aware of their surroundings, and you're always sifting for falsehood, weaknesses, or outright lies. And even honest people will sometimes try to, if you don't embellish it, let's say lean it a little bit this way or that way, right? And so there was a tendency for me, if I had some concerns, is to look at the physical evidence at that scene. I'm telling about a car accident here. Where was the point of impact? Okay. What's the skid marks tell me about the speed of the car? And the damage and things like that. I tended to rely more heavily and scrutinize that physical evidence first. So long as it wasn't tampered with, there's a tendency for it to have been more reliable. Now, that's something that I didn't fully appreciate the effects of me being a lie detector constantly, right? Because you go home to your family, and your spouse and your children don't want to be treated that way. It's hard, can be hard to turn that off, right? So there's a factor there.
It can transfer to your personal life.
Yes.
You become suspicious of even friends,
of
family,
of everything and everybody, and that's not healthy. So I knew what I.
So there's a stress on a family. There's an example of a stress on a family.
It's a pretty good example. And the other thing is sometimes you come home and you don't want to talk about it, some of the negativity that you've experienced. Like if you've had a difficult day in court, and everyone I'm sure will remember the O.J. Simpson trial. Yeah. Okay, so I was married during this, still am. And I'm married to my first wife, which is rare. And so anyway, when that O.J. Simpson trial was going along, it was in another country, but it was being televised, and it got a lot of attention. So I remember when F. Lee Bailey was a defense lawyer, was cross-examining a police witness who was testifying. And I said to my wife, "Come here, please. I want you to sit down and watch this program while this is going on, because when I go to court and I'm testifying, this is what I'm experiencing in court." So F. Lee Bailey was working on this officer. I can't even remember who it was or what their evidence was. My wife, after watching that for an hour, said, "Okay, I understand now." Right? And so she understood now, because how can words describe that? Okay, and sometimes when I was, after that time frame, I was as a police officer, people would be trying to report a crime to me and telling me that this is easy, you should be able to arrest this person. I suspect that such and such a person did it. Well, there wasn't evidence to support that, right? And they said, what's the problem? And I said, well, wait a minute. And this is at that time frame. I said, did you watch the O.J. Simpson trial on TV? And they go, yeah. I said, did it look easy to you? No. I said, okay. So you now understand the court system better, right? So it was actually useful to me. Now that was a situation where television was realistic.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it was real.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas movies, where people are injured and then they come back after the commercial with their arm in a sling when they've been shot or whatever, this is not realistic. An actual gunshot wound is a very hideous thing to see, and it lasts and affects your health for the rest of your life. And so anyway, you see this stuff, and so this is going on. That's a fact.
Would you say that police officers become, first of all, suspicious?
Yes.
Secondly, do they become hardened or cynical?
Yes, I think
to a certain extent.
I touched on that.
It's nonsense they got to put up with.
Yeah,
you
have to toughen up a bit. Now, having said that, sometimes there's things that there's no way that you can be prepared for it, or no matter how tough you are, it's going to hurt. Right? And so I can think of an example where an estranged husband took his children and committed suicide and asphyxiated himself and his children. And the officers left. And went to this scene and came back. These are detectives. They're very experienced, and they would have seen most of it. Like I have seen a lot of death in my life. I've gone to sudden death scenes, and I was involved in some homicide investigations. I've seen a fair bit of it. And when the officers came back from that scene, they had tears running down their cheeks, right? This is a sign of how emotionally dramatic and how much it impacted them, and that's trauma. That's
absolutely.
Okay? So the police services have systems to deal with this. They give you, they have on-call psychologists or or whatnot. So if you're experiencing an emotional, personal crisis in your own life, if you're getting divorced yourself, you have somebody to talk to.
Right.
And also they do debriefing of large incidents. Like, so for example, when an officer commits suicide, they'll have somebody come in to speak to everybody because they've lost a colleague, right? And I've had experiences like this. I've known several officers who committed suicide. So you are hardened to things, but still things penetrate, and you're not supposed to show it outside. But when you go home, you don't want to talk about it. I'd like to lighten this up a little bit and say that I recall I was at some function and there were other people talking to me, and so they said, well, did you have a difficult time with that case? And in fact, it was a brutal case because it had received a lot of media attention. It was a contract killing case. And I started to talk about this, what I'd gone through, trying to deal with a protected witness, right? And, just horrendous things where the person, my witness, tried to commit suicide. He was in crisis. And I had to try to rush him to a hospital, and I did. And then I had to guard him and was in another place, and not in my hometown because you relocate them. And I remember calling and leaving my wife a voicemail because I couldn't reach her, and said, I'm okay. I won't be home. I can't tell you where I am. I'm someplace in North America, but everything is fine. Don't worry. I've experienced some problems at work, and I'll probably get home sometime late tomorrow. Okay. Now, you have to have an exceptional wife to handle that stuff, right?
Exactly.
So, but I would go home, and so I'm at this social gathering where there are police, and I start to tell the story, and my wife is with me, and she's never heard any of this before, right? And so she's listening, and these people are like, I don't think I was boring them, because I was telling them how this case went, right? And my wife is, hey, wait a minute, that's an interesting story, right? She'd heard nothing about it because when I came home, I didn't want to talk about it. The stress was tough on me, and that was a difficult case. Officers were getting physically sick during that case because we were running ourselves ragged, trying to keep up with all of the things that we had to do while the court case was going on.
I see.
And then this is a sign, this is something that that the average citizen doesn't see. They see us giving out a ticket. They don't see those dedicated officers who are totally committed to their work and are giving up time at home. Right. It's not a 9-to-5 job, right? And just to obtain a conviction, and they read about it in the paper. But I want to challenge you.
The scenes, yeah.
Yes, what's going on? I want to challenge you a little bit on what you said at the start. That I think that the public, on average, supports the police. Okay, and I think they have. I hope they have confidence in the police, and that's very, very important. Some don't. Agreed.
Yes.
But I knew when I was doing my job, different things happened. So, for example, I might be going into an elevator or to go to a call inside an apartment building, and there'd be other people get in, and I'm going, and they turn to me and say, boy, I'm glad I don't have your job. Right? Now, really what they're saying is, thank you for doing this job. Somebody has to do it.
Yes.
That it's hidden in there, but they're expressing some appreciation.
Yes.
Or when I remember there was a time when there was a widespread power outage around the Great Lakes, and everything was out. And I knew driving into work that day, I'm driving through the downtown area, and none of the traffic lights are working. I was thinking to myself, this is going to be a very difficult day at work. Right, and I was in a leadership role at that time, and so anyway, we put officers out at all the intersections to direct traffic because there was no traffic lights. Okay, it required a lot of personnel, but what happened was people stopped and gave the officers a bottle of water. They went and bought water for them, and they gave them more than some of them had 2 or 3 bottles of water. people cared about the job the officer was doing, and that's a form of appreciation,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So I think that there are people
There are people.
that do support.
I want to go back for a minute to with the family. You talked about the effects or the situation a wife goes through. But what about the kids of officers? How do you think it impacts the kids negatively? And then I want to go to the positive. But first, I'd like to on the kids, or does it impact negatively compared to other jobs that fathers or mothers might have?
Well, first of all, let's reemphasize, I do not expect sympathy for this. A lot of people have challenging jobs,
Right.
and people have stressful jobs. And let's not forget all the other first responders, nurses, doctors in emergency rooms, paramedics, fire officers, like firemen.
Right.
That's a poor term nowadays. But the fire service, all these first responders are all experiencing things like this. So anyway, I can only speak as a son of a police officer and as the father of a son.
Yes.
Okay, and I know he would have preferred. I said, Dad, do you think you can spend less time at work? Because what I was doing was I was managing difficult situations and risk, which was stressful, and managing people, which was stressful. Meanwhile, I'm taking university courses to improve myself, which helped me. And at the same time, I'm volunteering in the community. And I would take him along with me in uniform. I'm in uniform, so that he could have a positive experience with other police officers. While I'm saying this, I want to say that I knew, because I was the son of a police officer, that there's the potential for all jobs change people, right? Your life experiences change you.
Absolutely.
And I kept my friends outside the organization to balance out some of my perceptions that I had about the world.
Interesting.
But when I arrived on the street, first of all, I was shocked when I started answering these calls for service. I can recall parking down the street, and you could hear the shouting of a domestic dispute and the screaming, right? And you park down the street because you don't want to pull up right in front. Again, you have to be cautious. And I'm walking down the street with another couple of officers, and everybody else is out on the street. This is like the middle of the night with their house coats on, clutching their house coats. And you could hear it, right? And when we walked up to the house, there was blood on the front steps, and the front door was off its hinges on the front lawn, and there was broken glass, right? And you know what I was thinking when I was doing this, aside from, what the heck did I get myself into? I was thinking, boy, do I ever appreciate my parents and the home that I grew up in, which was a stable home. Okay, it was stable. My father was very disciplined, very demanding, right? But he was also hard on himself, so he was fair. But as of growing up, you know what? I have to tell you, it made a convenient excuse when people were going to do things that were wrong. I would say to them, I can't do this. My father's a cop. I'm going to find out. Right?
Yeah.
And that got me out of the situation, and I could leave with some sense of self-respect. I didn't have to go along, didn't feel pressured. So it had that little bit of an advantage.
Right.
And I noticed that other kids that had police officers for father were the same.
So that's a positive there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's flip to positives. One positive is, of course, you mentioned that in the heart of a negative, which is you don't spend as much time at home
Right.
as you would like as an officer. But the positive is that you see situations where it kind of brings about a real sense of gratitude.
Yes.
For you not having to be raised like that, or
Right.
in that situation, or even living today in that situation.
Yes. Well, you think about
It creates gratitude.
Yes, and you walk into that home where there is an absolute fight going on, screaming, right?
Yeah.
And this is at a bad domestic, like a very violent domestic, right? And there are children there, and they're awake, and you look in their faces, right?
Yeah.
And we have ways we recognize now, like we're getting better. There's improvement. At one time in the past, there wasn't the resources, but we deal with and we call what is referred to in Canada and elsewhere as victim services to deal with the emotional trauma that those children are experiencing.
Yes. Would you ever have cops break right down there seeing kids
No,
like
because
that?
you're
No.
afraid. See, you're walking into this home. You don't know where the weapons are. Don't forget, right? And if it,
So
this
they
is a
kinda-
violent
they put a
situation.
they create a real veil there, cop, so that they don't break down right there.
Well, you have
Or
to.
the other thing is become violent. Some people would become so upset at the situation they start beating on the husband or whoever
Well,
victimizes these kids.
When the police arrived, there was a potential for people to feel that okay, I'm going to be safe now and let loose a little bit, or then I hate to say this, but the person who's the abuser is going to deny it, right?
Oh, so they calm down.
Okay,
They
there's a
deny
tendency
it.
for that to happen,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And sometimes this is a really bad one. I would like to emphasize, but there is times when there were a little more straightforward, and the police were called sometimes by one of the people in the house, or sometimes not. Sometimes it's the neighbors who called because they felt somebody was going to get hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your role there is to calm everybody down, solve the short-term problem, which we're better at, okay? But you also have to think about the long-term problem of
Right.
continuing issues,
Right.
and that is where the difficulty arrives, because you don't really have a magic wand. There are resources for this, but that's hard to change people's behavior, right?
Right. So, Anthony, in addition to, let's say, a sense of gratitude,
Right.
Thank God I didn't grow up in this home, thank God I don't live in this kind of environment, what other positives does an officer get
Okay.
from being an officer?
Well, I have to say, it contributed to me becoming a police officer, because my father, by the way, discouraged it.
Oh.
He said, "You can do whatever you want, son, but don't become a policeman. Do what you want so long as you're good at it and you enjoy it, right? But don't become a police officer." So, of course, there was only one choice for me. But anyway,
Police officer.
I realized, like I said earlier, I wanted to help people and I wanted to make a contribution to society. And also, what happened was, sometimes police officers came to visit my home. As you had a home, I think, when you grew up, that attracted people to
Yes.
visitors, right?
Yes.
And these were police officers who, there's a tendency to socialize among people who understand. Now, this is an observation I've made. I think that sometimes police officers marry nurses because nurses understand the crises that they go through. They can identify.
Interesting.
Okay, this is your typical thing. Anyway, when I was young, the people that I respected were all police officers. I respected their worldliness. I respected them for their self-confidence I saw, okay, in them. And I think that, like all jobs, you learn, you grow, you get more. If a good police officer, I think, learns from their experience and never stops learning, never stops trying to improve. A good anybody, a good fireman, a good doctor is always trying to learn and expand, right? So, but I did respect them, and that lasted and stuck with me. And I continued to respect good officers when I worked with them or for them, or supervised them.
Right.
But that's a positive.
So that's a positive in that you have this group of people that you respect in your life, you hold in
Right.
high regard. Would you say that a positive is the camaraderie, that sense of friendship or camaraderie that you would have with fellow officers for a whole career?
Well, it could. The shift work works against that, eh?
Oh.
Because you might get close with another couple, and then one of them gets transferred to a different shift schedule that is totally opposite to your own, and you grow apart. I tried to, I wasn't a big socializer, so I'm probably not the best person to ask that.
What would you say is another positive, if you can think of one?
They're hard to, but I guess it's a.
Think of a
It tells.
positive in terms of whether your own self, spiritual, emotional development, in terms of your impact on your family. We mentioned the negatives, or your effect with your friendships, or
Yeah.
your effect with your relationship if you're a believer with God. Like what give me another positive that an impact that being a police officer has on the individual.
Well, you do get an
You
incredible.
seem like you're struggling.
I am, and that tells us something.
Yeah,
if I have to think
exactly.
about that.
Yeah.
But it's an incredible sense of satisfaction to help somebody. Don't forget that you're there to do this, right? And you can lose sight of that if you allow yourself to. But when you get to help somebody, then you get a sense, a feeling that is like no other, right? And you're in a perfect role to help people. There's a lot of demands made upon you. There's a lot of challenges, and sometimes even when you help people, they're not thankful for it. But that's a different
Right,
story.
Right.
No, I have to say.
So you would say that you feel another positive is you feel good about yourself.
Yes.
You feel good about what you do. You feel worthwhile.
Yes.
You feel of value, because a lot of people have jobs they don't feel that.
That feels somewhat meaningless.
Yes.
Some jobs. I've had other jobs part time when I was a student and whatnot, but I always remember what was written inside my jacket. I started some time ago when I actually walked the beat, which was, it's you're going to have one-on-one contact with people. Anyway, written inside my jacket was a phrase. It said, "Whatever rightly done, however humble, is noble."
Wow.
Okay, and so even it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, say that
but
again.
Whatever rightly done, however humble, is noble.
Beautiful.
And if you can keep that in mind, and I like that poem from Grelais, or it's attributed to him, about kindness. If there's a kindness I can show or a deed I can do, let me not defer it or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. Okay, so it's important to keep that in mind.
Yes.
And so when you can, do something small.
Yes.
Okay, and this goes back to what Mother Teresa has said, saying, well, what should we do? Because everybody can't leave their life and go and serve the poor in some remote country or whatever. She says, well, do small things with great love. Okay, so you touched upon spirituality in your question, and I would say that it's possible to retain your spirituality as a police officer.
If you look at it that way,
yes,
do small things with
great love, right?
Yes.
But you have to retain your integrity.
Yes.
And there's challenges to that. Okay, and you're not going to be everybody's friend if you're retaining your integrity. Okay,
right,
and so there is this expression, I think it's attributed to Paul Newman, a person with no enemies has no principles, right? And so, okay, so you can't be everybody's friend when you're doing that, right? And sometimes you have an obligation as a police officer to do things that you really don't want to do, but you know that it needs to be done to fulfill the role you're expected to do it. Giving out the ticket to the honest person is an example. And the irony is that is so little of what you do in your day, it doesn't at all represent who you are.
No.
Or what your job is.
No.
And
Although some people in the public may perceive it that way.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing there is I never thought of that you would have this feeling of self-fulfillment, purpose, meaning in life.
Yeah.
Doing this work. Because if we look at past generations and even over hundreds of years, the only pleasure people got, not everybody, but most people I would say, got was I went to work so I could feed my children or my family. And there's my good feeling.
Yes.
But being a police officer, it does offer both. It offers I go to work so that I can support my family, feed my family, and I get this good feeling that I'm doing something
important
that helps the human condition.
From time to time, you get to help that one individual, and they're thankful for it, right? It's not every day.
No.
And we should note that in other countries, the police are not necessarily respected. There's that, they're considered to be corrupt. It's not a noble profession,
Yeah.
right? It's not considered a job of respect,
Right.
worthy of respect.
But
And-
usually those countries, the whole country's corrupt. You're talking about third world despot countries.
Yeah.
The whole country's corrupt.
Yes, and
Yes.
let's not pretend that at least no matter what country you're in, there's the opportunity or the temptation or the challenges with respect to corruption.
Sure.
And there's no organization that has 100% perfect employees. And what can I tell you? But even Jesus Christ had a hard time finding 12 good apostles. Okay, it happens. But by and large in Canada, I think it's fair to say that the police are honorable
Yes.
and are not corrupt.
Yes.
Although I've had people, challenge my corruption.
Is that right?
From outside. People try to bribe me or things like that.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Okay, so that's
tempt you with
they
these,
tempt. They
yeah.
say, "Look, would you take some money?" And
Yeah.
I can't do that, right?
But I would say, generally speaking, even in North America, states and Canada, the police are. You always get people who are corrupt, but generally speaking, they're good people. I've spent a lot of time in the States, and I've met officers there, and I think I've been pulled over a couple times for whatever, and I always found them civil and nice and respectful, and
Yes, and wouldn't it be great if everyone could say that
yes,
all the time?
Yes.
But the police strive to be better, I hope. A good organization does, and it's really a privilege.
interesting.
So, as opposed to working for a profit-oriented corporation that relies totally on trying to make money at business, I think you can still have integrity in business and whatnot. But it's a privilege to be paid to go out and try to do right.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
That's a great attitude towards that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. We looked at the positives and negatives on the individual officer and the impact on the family. But in closing, something you said before we went on air here about what kind of society would we live in if we didn't have police officers.
Yes.
And we didn't have 911.
Yes. So it was a line from a movie where things had gone almost apocalyptic, and everything was out of control, and someone was trying to think in a civilized way, and the other actor, the character, said, "Well, that was when you could pick up the phone and call 911, but we can't do that now. So we're on our own." Okay, this is not a civilized situation that we're in, right?
Right.
And so it's the thread that holds society together. One of them,
Yes,
as does the
yes.
rule of law,
Yes.
and a couple of other very important principles of our society. And aren't we, in a way, shouldn't we all be thankful of the listeners if they can pick up the phone and dial 911 and think they're going to get a professional response for a medical emergency or for a fire in their home or any of the other possible things
Be
that can happen,
protected,
and
yeah.
trust that the person coming is going to be there to help them.
Right.
It's when you think that you're the person who gets to walk through the door, that is the privilege, right? But you do have to be cautious about your own safety and whatnot. And just so we're clear, I have saved lives personally. Okay, prevented people from committing suicide, things like that, and I remember them all. And I recall in one instance I did this, and someone was going to try to burn themselves to death, and I saved them. It was a very dramatic moment, right? And I still remember the person's name, and it was close. We'll leave it there. So anyway, years later, I saw him, this person, and he didn't recognize me, and I didn't say anything to him, but I knew he'd gone on successfully and was living a good life. And it was very satisfying to me to meet him. And he had no idea, because I think I wasn't in uniform, the second time I met him, and the time he met me, he just saw the uniform, and also he was not in a
Right.
good state of mind,
Of course,
right?
of course,
So
yeah.
anyway, that's satisfying.
Interesting. Well, what a great show this was with Officer Anthony. I gotta thank him for coming on today and enlightening us to the difficult and great work that police officers do. We gotta have you back for part 2. And thank you to all of you for joining us. Remember, write us at drdoctorpodcast@yahoo.com, drdrpodcast@yahoo.com. And if you'd like a digital copy of the book, The History of Time, we'll send that to you. And bidding you all a great day and a good week. Thank you.